A Werewolf Shifter Romance, written by Amelia Hart. Chapter 1. Wine and Shadows. The stone floors of Ironhold Castle never stayed clean for long. Sarah had learned this truth during her first week as a servant 5 years ago, when she was 18 and still foolish enough to believe hard work might earn her respect. Now, at 23, she knew better. The grime would return no matter how many hours she spent on her knees scrubbing, just as the whispers would return, no matter how invisible she tried to make herself. Move aside, wolfless. Sarah pressed herself against the cold wall as 3 beta servants swept past, their arms laden with bolts of silk for the evening's banquet. They didn't look at her. Nobody ever did. Not really. To the wolves of Valemont, an omega without a wolf was less than furniture. At least furniture served a purpose. The great hall buzzed with preparation. Tonight, Alpha King Alderon would formally announce his engagement to Lady Beatrice Thornberry, sealing an alliance that would bring the wealthiest pack in the kingdom under the crown's direct influence. Sarah had heard the gossip in the kitchens, whispered between the other servants when they forgot she existed. Lord Thornberry controlled the northern trade routes. His daughter controlled him. And soon, if the rumors held true, Lady Beatrice would control the king himself. Sarah wondered what that must feel like, to hold such power, to walk into a room and have every head turn, to speak and have people listen instead of talking over you as if you were the wind. There you are. Margot's weathered face appeared around the corner, her gray hair escaping its usual tight bun. The head cook was the only person in the castle who spoke to Sarah without that particular edge of disgust reserved for the broken. I need you to take linens to the East Wing guest chambers. The Thornberry party arrived early. Yes, ma'am. Margot's hand caught her elbow before she could turn away. Wait. I found something in one of the rooms. A dress, left behind by some previous guest. Beautiful thing. Probably forgot it was there. She pressed a bundle of fabric into Sarah's arms. Hide it in your quarters. Consider it payment for all the extra work tonight. Sarah's fingers sank into soft silk the color of fresh snow. She had never owned anything beautiful. Her own dress was rough homespun, dyed the dull brown that marked servants and wolfless alike. Margot, I couldn't. You can, and you will. Now go, before someone sees. The bundle felt impossibly light as Sarah carried it through the servant corridors, her heart beating faster than it should. Beautiful things didn't belong to girls like her. They belonged to people with wolves, with status, with futures that extended beyond scrubbing stones until their hands bled. She had just hidden the dress beneath her thin mattress when urgent footsteps echoed down the hall. Sarah barely had time to smooth her apron before Lady Beatrice Thornberry swept into the servants' quarters, flanked by 2 of her ladies-in-waiting. You. Beatrice's ice-blue eyes fixed on her with the focus of a predator spotting prey. The wolfless girl. Seraphine, isn't it? Sarah dropped into a curtsy, keeping her gaze on the floor. Yes, my lady. I have need of you tonight. You will attend the banquet. The words didn't make sense. Servants didn't attend banquets, especially not Omega servants, and especially not wolfless ones. My lady, I don't understand. Did I ask you to understand? Beatrice's voice could have cut glass. There's a dress in your quarters. I saw it when I had your room inspected earlier. You'll wear it tonight and stand where I tell you to stand. Consider it a great honor. Something cold settled in Sarah's stomach. The dress Margot had given her. How had Beatrice known? Unless Margot hadn't found it at all. Unless this was a trap. I would prefer not to, my lady. It wouldn't be appropriate. I'm not asking. The temperature in the room dropped as Beatrice let her alpha power leak into her voice, just enough to make Sarah's knees weak. You will wear the dress. You will attend. And you will be grateful for the opportunity to rise above your station, even if only for one evening. Do you understand? Sarah's throat tightened, but she forced the words out. Yes, my lady. Wonderful. Beatrice's smile was a beautiful, terrible thing. We'll send someone to fetch you when it's time. The white silk felt like a lie against Sarah's skin. The dress fit perfectly, which should have been her first warning. It clung to curves she didn't know she had, the neckline lower than anything she'd ever worn. She had washed her face and brushed her long brown hair until it fell straight and smooth down her back, but no amount of preparation could hide what she was. Wolfless, broken, wrong, The servant who came to collect her said nothing, just led her through corridors Sarah had only ever scrubbed. The great hall doors stood open ahead, spilling golden light and the scent of roasted meat and wine. Music played inside. Laughter echoed off stone walls built to withstand sieges. Sarah stepped through the threshold and felt every eye in the room slide over her without really seeing. She was furniture again, dressed in borrowed beauty that fooled no one. "Stand there." A servant pointed to a spot along the wall, near enough to the high table to be visible, but far enough to mark her as insignificant. Sarah obeyed. The hall was magnificent. Banners in royal crimson hung from the vaulted ceiling. Hundreds of candles cast dancing shadows across faces flushed with wine and celebration. At the high table, Alpha King Alderaan sat in his great chair. Dark hair pulled back to reveal the strong line of his jaw. His beard was neatly trimmed, his broad shoulders draped in a cloak of deep burgundy. At 32, he commanded the room without speaking, his presence heavy as stone. Beside him, Lady Beatrice glowed in cream silk embroidered with gold thread. Her blonde curls were intricately arranged, her neck adorned with rubies that caught the light. She leaned close to whisper something in the king's ear, her hand resting possessively on his arm. He didn't smile. Sarah had never paid much attention to the Alpha King before. He was too far above her to matter, like the sun. Necessary for life, but impossible to approach. But now, standing in this room full of people who belonged, she found herself watching him. There was something in the way he held himself, a tension that spoke of burdens invisible to everyone else. "Wine, my lady." Sarah turned to find a serving girl offering a tray of goblets. "No, thank you. I'm not—" "Oh, but you must." Lady Beatrice had appeared beside her, moving with the silence of a predator. "It would be rude to refuse." Sarah's hand trembled as she accepted the goblet. The wine inside was darker than blood. "You look lovely tonight," Beatrice said, loud enough that several nobles nearby turned to look. "That dress suits you remarkably well. Wherever did you find such a fine garment?" The trap was springing. Sarah could feel it closing around her throat. "A servant found it, my lady. I was told I could—" "A servant?" Beatrice's voice rose in mock surprise. "How curious. That dress belonged to my cousin. It went missing 3 months ago. I had assumed it was stolen." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Stolen. The word hung in the air like smoke. "I didn't know, my lady. I would never—" "Of course you wouldn't." Beatrice's smile was poison sweet as she lifted her own goblet. "It's fortunate we recovered it before you could sell it. Here, let me toast to your resourcefulness." The wine moved in slow motion. Sarah saw it coming but couldn't move fast enough, couldn't breathe past the sudden knowledge that this moment would break her. The dark liquid splashed across the white silk, staining it deep crimson. It soaked through to her skin, cold and shameful. Laughter erupted around her. Not the warm laughter of shared joy, but the cruel kind that fed on suffering. Sarah stood frozen as wine dripped from her hair onto her shoulders, as nobles pointed and whispered behind raised hands. The wolfless tried to dress above her station. Someone said, "Did she really think she could fool anyone? She's probably been stealing for years. You know how they are." Beatrice's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "Oh dear, how clumsy of me. You should probably go change before you embarrass yourself further." Sarah's vision blurred. She would not cry. She would not give them that. But her lungs refused to work properly, and her hands shook as she tried uselessly to wipe wine from her ruined dress. The fabric clung to her, heavy with shame. She should leave, run back to the kitchens where she belonged, but her feet wouldn't move, frozen under the weight of dozens of stares that finally saw her, but only to mock. Then the temperature in the room changed. Sarah felt it before she understood it, a pressure that made her ears pop and her skin prickle. The laughter died, as if someone had cut every throat at once. Even the musicians fell silent mid-note. Alpha King Alderaan had risen from his seat. His golden eyes swept across the hall, and Sarah would later swear she felt the touch of that gaze like fingers against her soul. He moved with the controlled grace of violence barely leashed, descending from the high table with steps that echoed in the sudden quiet. The crowd parted before him. He wasn't looking at them. He was looking at her. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to run, to hide, to disappear into the stones themselves. But those golden eyes held her pinned like a butterfly to board. Alderon stopped 3 paces away. This close, she could see the scar cutting through his right eyebrow, the silver threading his dark beard. Power radiated from him in waves that made her knees weak. Not the cruel dominance Beatrice wielded, but something older, deeper. The kind of power that held kingdoms together through force of will alone. Who did this? His voice wasn't loud, but it carried to every corner of the hall. Sarah's mouth refused to work. She couldn't accuse Lady Beatrice. That would only make things worse. The king's eyes never left her face as he spoke again. Everyone in this hall, kneel. The command hit like thunder. Sarah's legs buckled before her mind registered the words. All around her, bodies dropped. Nobles in silk, servants in wool, even the guards at the doors. Lady Beatrice fell to her knees with a gasp of shock, her beautiful dress pooling around her. Only one person remained standing. Alpha King Alderon reached for the clasp at his throat and removed his royal cloak in one fluid motion. The heavy burgundy fabric settled around Sarah's shoulders, warm from his body and smelling of pine smoke and winter storms. It swallowed her small frame, covering the wine-stained dress completely. "You will not kneel," he said softly. Meant only for her. Not for this. Not ever again. Sarah stared up at him, unable to breathe, unable to think. His hands remained on her shoulders where he'd settled the cloak, and beneath his palms her skin burned as if she'd pressed against a forge. Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition she didn't understand, a connection that made no sense. Golden eyes searched her face as if memorizing every detail, and for the first time in her life, Sarah felt truly seen. The king's jaw tightened. Then he turned to address the hall, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "This woman is under my protection. Anyone who harms her answers to me. Is that understood?" Silence. "Is that understood?" "Yes, Alpha King." 200 voices answered as one. Alderon's hand fell away from her shoulder, leaving cold in its wake. He strode back to the high table without another word, leaving Sarah standing alone in the center of the hall, wrapped in royal crimson and drowning in confusion. The feast resumed slowly, cautiously, but nothing would ever be the same. Sarah didn't know how long she stood there, the king's cloak heavy on her shoulders, the hall's eyes burning into her skin. The nobles had returned to their wine and whispered conversations, but the glances they cast her way were different now, no longer dismissive. Now they were calculating, wary, confused. She needed to leave, to return to the kitchens where she belonged, to strip off this cursed dress and pretend tonight had never happened. But her legs refused to obey, still shaking from the force of the alpha command that had driven her to her knees. "You, girl." Sarah's head snapped up. A royal guard stood before her, his expression carefully neutral. He was older, his beard more gray than black, and he wore the king's colors on his tabard. "The Alpha King requests your presence in his private study. 1 hour from now." The guard's voice was low, meant only for her ears. "A servant will come to collect you from your quarters." Her mouth went dry. Why would the king? 1 hour. The guard's eyes flickered to the wine stain still visible beneath the royal cloak. "Don't be late." He left before she could respond, disappearing into the crowd as if he'd never been there at all. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. The Alpha King wanted to see her. Alone. In his private study. Nothing good could come from this. She fled the great hall as quickly as dignity allowed. The king's cloak clutched tight around her shoulders. Behind her, she felt Lady Beatrice's ice-blue eyes tracking her every step, cold with a fury that promised retribution. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Dark. Sarah's hands trembled as she stood outside the king's private study. The guard who'd collected her from the servants' quarters had said nothing during their walk through corridors she'd never seen before. These halls were different from the ones she scrubbed, carpeted in deep burgundy, walls lined with tapestries depicting ancient battles and crowned wolves. The door before her was carved oak, reinforced with iron. Behind it waited the Alpha King, the man who had defended her, the man whose cloak still hung in her quarters because she hadn't dared return it. The guard knocked once. "Enter," came the response, muffled by thick wood. The study was smaller than Sarah expected. Books lined every wall from floor to ceiling, their leather spines cracked with age. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across a massive desk covered in maps and documents. And there, standing with his back to her, was Alderon. He'd removed his formal attire. Now he wore simple dark trousers and a white linen shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows. Without the crown and cloak, he looked younger, almost human, almost approachable. "Close the door." Sarah obeyed, her heart hammering. Being alone with the Alpha King violated every rule she knew. If anyone discovered this, her reputation, already destroyed, would become something far worse. Alderon turned, and those golden eyes found hers across the room. Up close, without the crowd between them, the intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. "Sit, Your Majesty. I prefer to stand." That wasn't a request. Sarah sank into the chair before his desk, keeping her spine straight despite the exhaustion pulling at her bones. It had been hours since the banquet. Hours spent scrubbing wine from her skin, trying to forget the laughter. The king moved to pour wine from a crystal decanter. Dark red, like what Beatrice had thrown. Sarah's stomach turned. "I don't drink, Your Majesty." "Neither do I, usually." He set both goblets aside and leaned against his desk, arms crossed. "Tell me your name." "Your full name." "Seraphine, Your Majesty." "I have no family name. My parents died when I was 12. Something flickered across his face. "How did they die?" "Rogue attack. They were traveling merchants, caught on the road at dusk." The memory was old enough not to hurt anymore. Or perhaps she'd simply learned to carry the pain without showing it. "I've been in service at the castle since I was 18. 5 years. His eyes never left her face. "And in those 5 years, has anyone treated you with kindness?" The question caught her off guard. "Margot, the head cook. She doesn't see me as less, but everyone else does." It wasn't a question, but Sarah nodded anyway. There was no point lying to an Alpha King. He could probably smell deception. Alderon was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Finally, he spoke. "What happened tonight was unacceptable. Lady Beatrice humiliated you in front of my court, and I will not tolerate such cruelty under my roof. Your Majesty, she's your betrothed. That doesn't give her permission to abuse servants." His voice hardened. "Or anyone else." Sarah didn't know what to say to that. In her experience, nobles did whatever they pleased, and servants learned to endure. The fact that the king cared at all seemed impossible. "I felt something tonight," Alderon continued, his tone quieter now. "When I saw you standing there covered in wine while they laughed." His jaw clenched. "My wolf reacted in a way I don't understand. Protective, furious, as if you were—" He stopped himself, shaking his head. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that you're safe." "Safe from what, Your Majesty?" "From them. From her." He straightened, authority settling back over his shoulders. "Effective immediately, you're reassigned. You'll work in the royal wing, my private chambers, the library, places where Lady Beatrice has no jurisdiction. Margot will remain head cook. But you answer only to me now." Sarah's mouth went dry. "Your Majesty, that will only make things worse. Lady Beatrice will think—" "I don't care what she thinks." The command in his voice made her wolf-weak body respond instinctively, wanting to submit. "You'll be protected here. That's final." She wanted to argue, to tell him his protection would only paint a target on her back. But before he could insist further, she lifted her chin. "Then let me prove myself worthy of that protection, Your Majesty." The words surprised even her, a spark of courage breaking through the years of submission. "Yes, Your Majesty." Something in his expression softened. "When we're alone, you may call me Alderon." The intimacy of it shocked her. "I couldn't possibly—" "You can. And you will." He moved back around his desk, putting distance between them. "You're dismissed. Report to the royal wing at dawn." Sarah stood on shaking legs and curtsied. As she reached the door, his voice stopped her. "Seraphine." She turned. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "Thank you for coming. I know you were frightened." The admission that he'd noticed her fear, that he cared about it, left her speechless. She fled before he could see the tears burning behind her eyes. The weeks that followed blurred together in ways Sarah couldn't track. Her new duties were simple: dusting the royal wing's endless shelves, changing linens in chambers that smelled of pine and winter, tending the fire in the library. But simple didn't mean easy. Lady Beatrice's fury was a living thing. Sarah felt it in the cold glances when they passed in corridors, the whispered conversations that died when she entered rooms. Small disasters began to plague her: spilled ink on freshly cleaned floors, missing keys that turned up in her pockets, broken vases she swore she hadn't touched. Margot noticed. "She's trying to get you dismissed," the older woman warned one morning in the kitchens. "Be careful, child. An enemy with a crown is still an enemy." But Beatrice wasn't wearing a crown yet, and somehow that made her more dangerous. Sarah discovered the library by accident one night, unable to sleep. She'd been drawn by golden light spilling under a door she'd thought was a storage room. Inside, thousands of books rose toward vaulted ceilings. And there, surrounded by ancient texts, sat Alderon. He looked up as she entered, surprise crossing his face. "You read?" "Yes. Your mage—" She caught herself. Alderon. His name felt strange on her tongue. Intimate. Wrong and right all at once. "My mother taught me before she died. She said knowledge was the only thing no one could take from you." Something warm flickered in his eyes. She was wise. "Come, sit. Tell me what you like to read." That first night stretched into hours. They talked about stories, about worlds beyond Valamont's borders, about dreams and disappointments. Alderon spoke of the weight of kingship, the loneliness of decisions that affected thousands. Sarah shared her fear of disappearing, of dying without ever mattering to anyone. When dawn broke, they both startled at how quickly time had passed. It became their ritual. Most nights, Sarah would find him in the library, and he would look up with something that might have been relief. They never touched. Barely came within arm's reach, but the space between them felt charged. Dangerous in ways Sarah didn't understand. She started noticing things. The way his hands moved when he explained something he cared about, the rare smile that transformed his severe features, the exhaustion he tried to hide behind alpha authority. She wanted to reach out, to ease the tension she saw in his shoulders. She never did. The gap between them was too vast. King and servant, alpha and wolfless. But her body didn't care about logic. Her heart raced when he entered a room. Her skin burned where his gaze touched. And the dreams. Gods. The dreams that left her gasping awake in her small bed, aching for something she couldn't name. One night, she arrived at the library to find Alderon asleep in his chair, a book fallen open across his chest. His face was peaceful in sleep, the harsh lines softened. Without thinking, Sarah reached out to remove the book. Her fingers brushed the fabric of his shirt. The world exploded. Emotions crashed through her, not her own, but his. Loneliness so deep it felt like drowning. Responsibility that crushed like stones. And underneath it all, a yearning that matched her own, desperate and confused, and achingly familiar. Sarah jerked back, gasping. Alderon's eyes snapped open, golden and alert. "What happened?" "I don't know." Her hands shook. "I touched you and I felt everything you were feeling." He sat forward slowly, as if afraid to startle her. "Show me." "I can't control it." "Try." Sarah reached out again, her fingertips barely grazing the book he'd been reading. The impressions were fainter here, but still there. His frustration with the text. His worry about upcoming negotiations. The ever-present weight of his crown. "This isn't possible," she whispered. "I'm wolfless. I have no abilities." "Apparently," Alderon said softly. "You do." They experimented carefully. Objects held echoes of the emotions of those who'd touched them. The stronger the feeling, the clearer the impression. When Sarah touched his royal cloak, still hanging where she'd left it, she was overwhelmed by the fury he'd felt watching her humiliation, the protective rage that had made him command everyone to kneel. It wasn't attraction she felt in those threads. It was something deeper, something that terrified her. "This is a gift," Alderon told her as dawn painted the library windows gold. "Rare, even among wolves. You're not broken, Seraphine. You never were." Sarah wanted to believe him, but gifts were for people who mattered. She was just a servant who scrubbed floors. Still, she practiced in secret, touching objects, learning to read their histories, and as she did, she began to notice other changes. Her senses seemed sharper, her exhaustion faded, and the dreams that visited her sleep were no longer formless desire. Now they had shape. Silver fur and green eyes. A wolf that ran beneath an impossibly bright moon, calling out in a voice Sarah almost recognized. Calling to someone who might finally answer. Chapter 3. The Recognition. Margot found Sarah in the Royal Library 3 weeks after the banquet, curled in a window seat with an ancient tome on her lap. The older woman carried a tray laden with bread and cheese, which she set down with practiced care. "You need to eat, child. You're wasting away." Sarah marked her page and accepted the food, though her appetite had been sparse lately. The library had become her sanctuary, the only place where Beatrice's cold stares couldn't reach her. "Thank you, Margot." The cook settled into the chair opposite, her gray eyes studying Sarah with concern. "There are stories, you know, about girls like you, Omegas born without wolves. Stories about how we're broken?" The bitterness in Sarah's voice surprised even herself. "No." Margot's tone was firm. "Stories about Moonborn. Ancient tales passed down through generations of cooks and servants. The ones nobles dismiss as superstition." She leaned forward, voice dropping to a whisper. "They say Omegas without wolves aren't incomplete. They're blessed differently. The moon goddess marks certain children with gifts that don't require shifting. Healing. Visions. The ability to sense truth through touch." Margot's words didn't sound entirely foreign. Deep down, Sarah had always felt something. Whispers in the dark, sensations in the air that others couldn't sense. Now, it all began to make a terrible kind of sense. Sarah's hands trembled, remembering how she'd felt Alderon's emotions through objects. "That's impossible." "Is it? You've been discovering things, haven't you? Abilities you can't explain." Before Sarah could respond, the library door opened. Alderon entered, scrolls tucked under his arm, and stopped short at seeing them. His golden eyes found Sarah's immediately, and that familiar warmth flooded her chest, the connection she didn't understand but couldn't deny. "Margot." His voice carried authority tinged with warmth. "Leave us." The cook curtsied and departed, but not before squeezing Sarah's shoulder in support. Alderon waited until the door closed before speaking. "I found something. Records in the vault, sealed documents my father never showed me." He spread parchments across the reading table, his movements tense. "My grandfather had a mate bond with an Omega wolfless named Selena." Sarah's breath caught. What happened to her? She was murdered by rival nobles before the bond could fully form. They feared the power a moon-born Luna would bring to our bloodline. His jaw clenched, old rage simmering beneath controlled features. "My grandfather nearly destroyed the kingdom in his grief. The mate bond, even incomplete, was strong enough that losing her drove him half mad. That's why my family has avoided Omegas ever since. The risk, the vulnerability." He looked at her directly. "The fear. Why are you telling me this?" "Because I need to understand what's happening between us." He moved closer, and Sarah's skin prickled with awareness. "Every time you're near, my wolf responds as if you're mine to protect. But you're not. You can't be. I'm engaged to Beatrice, and you're wolfless, broken, beneath you." She stood, anger giving her courage. "I know what I am, Alderon. You don't need to remind me. That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" She faced him fully now, close enough to see the silver in his dark beard, the exhaustion shadowing his golden eyes. "Why do you keep coming to the library at night? Why do you share your burdens with a servant when you have advisors, nobles, an entire court at your disposal?" "Because they don't see me." The words came out raw, unguarded. "They see the Alpha King, the crown, the power. But when you look at me, Seraphine, you see a man. Someone who's tired and overwhelmed and terrified of failing everyone who depends on him." The vulnerability in his admission stole her breath. Without thinking, She reached out and touched his hand. The world exploded with sensation. Not just his emotions this time, but something deeper. A golden thread connecting them, pulsing with recognition that sang through her bones. She felt his loneliness echo her own. His fear of inadequacy matched hers. His desperate need for connection mirrored what she'd felt her entire life. And underneath it all, desire. Not just physical, though that burned hot enough to make her gasp, but the soul-deep yearning for someone who understood, who accepted, who saw past every mask and defense to the truth beneath. Alderon's eyes had gone wide, pupils blown dark with shock. "You feel it too. What is this?" Her voice shook. "I don't know. But it's been there since the banquet. Since I saw you standing in that hall, humiliated and alone, and every instinct I possessed screamed at me to protect you." They stood frozen, hands still touching, the connection between them growing stronger with each passing heartbeat. Sarah knew she should step away. This was the Alpha King, engaged to another woman, and she was nothing. But the thread binding them said otherwise. "Lady Beatrice requests your presence, your majesty." A servant's voice from the doorway shattered the moment. Alderon pulled back as if burned, and Sarah felt the loss of contact like physical pain. He composed himself quickly, authority settling back over his features. "I'll be there shortly." The servant departed. Alderon looked at Sarah one more time, conflict warring in his expression, then left without another word. Sarah sank into her chair, heart racing. What had just happened? The answer came violently the next evening. Sarah was carrying fresh linens through a rarely used corridor when Beatrice emerged from the shadows. The lady moved with predatory grace, blocking the only exit. "So, the little wolfless thinks she can seduce my betrothed. My lady, I've done nothing. Don't lie to me." Beatrice's power pressed down on her like before, but this time something inside Sarah pushed back. Not strength, not defiance, but a quiet refusal to break. It wasn't immunity, it was survival, Beatrice noticed. Her ice-blue eyes narrowed dangerously. "Interesting. Gaining strength, are we? Learning tricks? I don't know what you mean." Beatrice didn't waste words this time. The slap came fast, her power laced with fury. Sarah staggered, but didn't fall. The fear was still there, but so was something else. Something growing. Beatrice's eyes narrowed, realizing the girl she thought broken no longer cowered as before. With a final hissed warning, she swept away, leaving Sarah shaken, but standing. That night, Sarah made her decision. She would leave Ironhold, return to some distant village where no one knew her, where she could disappear completely. It was the only way to protect Alderon from scandal, to keep him safe from the consequences of whatever this strange connection between them was. She packed her few belongings by candlelight, moving carefully around the bruises Beatrice had left. The hematomas were hidden beneath her clothing, positioned deliberately where they wouldn't show. Beatrice was skilled at this kind of cruelty. Just before dawn, Sarah slipped through the castle's lesser-used passages toward the eastern gate. She'd almost reached freedom when a voice stopped her cold. "Where are you going?" Alderon stood in the shadowed archway, still dressed in yesterday's clothes, looking like he hadn't slept. His golden eyes locked onto her bundle, then her face, reading the truth there. "Answer me." "Away." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I'm leaving Ironhold." "Why?" He moved closer, and Sarah instinctively backed up. "What happened? Did someone threaten you?" "It doesn't matter. It matters to me." He reached for her arm and she flinched. The movement was small but telling. His eyes darkened with fury. "Who hurt you?" "No one. I just need to go." "Seraphine." His voice dropped into Alpha command. "Tell me who hurt you." The compulsion pressed against her will, demanding obedience. But unlike every other time she'd experienced an Alpha's dominance, this felt different, weaker, as if something inside her had learned to shield itself. She shook her head, fighting the order. "No." Alderon's eyes widened with shock. The command should have worked. On a wolfless Omega, it should have been absolute. But Sarah stood her ground, trembling with effort, but standing nonetheless. "How are you doing that?" "I don't know." Sarah's hands shook. "But I need to leave. Please, just let me go." "I can't." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Whatever's happening between us, running won't change it. There's nothing between us. There can't be. You're the Alpha King. And I'm mine. The word came out fierce, possessive. You're mine, Seraphine. I've been trying to deny it, trying to ignore what every instinct tells me, but I can't anymore. You're engaged to Beatrice. I don't want Beatrice. He cupped her face with both hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. I want you. Even though it makes no sense. Even though it's impossible. Even though every logical thought tells me this is madness. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Alderaan, we can't... He kissed her. The world shattered and reformed around them. The golden thread that had connected them since that first touch exploded into brilliant light, visible even with eyes closed. It wrapped around them, binding soul to soul, heart to heart, two halves of a whole finally recognizing each other. Sarah felt everything. His desperate loneliness matched to hers, his fierce protectiveness answering her need for safety, his desire burning as hot as her own. But more than that, she felt the rightness of it, the absolute certainty that this connection was real, sacred, meant to be. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the thread remained, pulsing with life, connecting them in ways that went beyond physical, beyond rational. What was that? Sarah whispered. A mate bond. Alderaan's voice was rough with wonder. The beginning of one, at least. The recognition stage, where souls acknowledge each other. His thumb traced her jaw gently. You're my fated mate, Seraphine. The moon goddess herself chose you for me. Tears spilled down her cheeks. But you're engaged. And I'm wolfless. How can this be possible? I don't know. But I'm going to find out. He pressed his forehead against hers, the intimacy of the gesture stealing her breath. And I'm going to protect you. Whatever threats you're facing, whatever made you try to run, we'll face it together. As dawn broke over Ironhold Castle, Sarah stood in the Alpha King's arms, feeling the mate bond pulse between them like a living thing. Everything had changed. Nothing would ever be the same. And somewhere in the castle's depths, Lady Beatrice smiled coldly, already planning her next move. Chapter 4. Truth's Perilous. The mate bond was torture. Sarah had believed nothing could be worse than the years of loneliness, the constant dismissal, the ache of being invisible. She'd been wrong. Because now she knew what connection felt like, and the absence of it was agony. 3 days after the kiss that had changed everything, Alderaan stood in the great hall conducting court business, and Sarah felt him like a wound that wouldn't heal. The golden thread connecting them pulled taut across the distance, demanding she go to him, be near him, close the gap that made her chest hurt. She pressed her palm against the stone wall, breathing through the pain. This was the initial stage, Alderaan had explained that morning in the library. The recognition phase, where souls acknowledged each other, but the bond wasn't yet complete. It would grow stronger over time, the pull more insistent, until they either completed the mating or went slowly mad from resisting. You look unwell. Margot appeared beside her, concern creasing her weathered features. When did you last eat? I'm not hungry. Food had lost all appeal. Sleep came in fitful bursts interrupted by dreams of silver fur and golden eyes. Everything felt wrong when Alderaan wasn't near, and even worse, he felt the same pull. She'd seen it in how his gaze followed her across rooms, how his hands clenched when she passed too close. This can't continue, Margot said quietly. The king is engaged. Whatever's happening between you two will only bring pain. I know. Sarah closed her eyes against tears that threatened. But I don't know how to stop it. The solution came from an unexpected source. That evening, Sarah was tasked with delivering fresh linens to the king's chambers. She moved through the familiar space, trying not to think about how his scent lingered on everything, how the mate bond sang with satisfaction at being surrounded by traces of him. A silver chalice sat on his desk, ornate and clearly meant for tomorrow's ceremony. Beatrice and Alderaan were scheduled to drink ceremonial wine before the court, a formal tradition that would mark the final step before their wedding. Sarah's fingers brushed the cup's rim as she moved to dust around it. The vision hit like a hammer. She saw Beatrice in a dark room, paying a hooded figure in gold coins. A woman with strange markings on her hands. A blood witch, illegal in Valemont. The witch mixed something dark and viscous into a vial, explaining in whispered tones how the potion would sever mate bonds, make the drinker incapable of recognizing their true mate. 1 dose in wine, and Alderaan would forget the pull toward Sarah entirely. But the vision didn't stop there. It went deeper, further back. Sarah gasped as she saw a military camp, soldiers in royal colors. A younger Beatrice, perhaps 19, slipping poison into a flask marked with the late king's seal. Lord Thornberry standing nearby, giving instructions. The king had died during that campaign. Everyone said of battle wounds. But Sarah watched him drink from the poisoned flask, watched him weaken and die while Thornberry whispered promises of controlling his young heir. 8 years. They'd been planning this for 8 years. Sarah jerked back from the chalice, breathing hard. Her hands shook violently as the implications crashed through her. Beatrice was a murderer. Thornberry a traitor. And tomorrow, they would complete their plan by severing Alderaan from his true mate and binding him to their family through vows he'd make while poisoned. Something wild stirred in Sarah's chest, responding to the threat against her mate. Not fear this time. Fury. Raw, primal rage that made her skin feel too tight, made her want to shift and bare teeth she didn't have. The sensation passed, leaving her shaken. What was happening to her? She had to tell Alderaan. Now, but when she burst into his private study without knocking, he wasn't alone. Lord Thornberry stood before the desk, his expression carefully neutral as he discussed tomorrow's ceremony. The older man's eyes flickered to Sarah with cold calculation. "Your Majesty, forgive the interruption." "Seraphine." Alderaan's voice held warning. They'd agreed to be careful, to avoid giving Beatrice or her father any ammunition. "This is not the time. It's urgent. Please." Thornberry smiled thinly. "The girl seems distressed. Perhaps she needs rest. I hear she's been working exhaustive hours in the royal wing." The implication was clear. He knew she spent time near Alderaan. The threat hung unspoken in the air. "That will be all, Lord Thornberry." Alderaan's tone left no room for argument. "We'll continue this discussion tomorrow." The nobleman departed with a curt bow, but not before giving Sarah a look that promised consequences. The moment the door closed, Alderaan was there, hands on her shoulders. "What's wrong? You're pale as death." "The chalice, the one for tomorrow's ceremony." Words tumbled out in a rush. "Beatrice had it poisoned. Not to kill you, but to sever the mate bond. There's a blood witch involved, and Alderaan..." She grabbed his wrists, needing him to believe. "Your father, he didn't die in battle. Beatrice poisoned him 8 years ago. Her father orchestrated everything so he could control you once you took the throne." Silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. Alderaan's face had gone carefully blank, the expression he wore when making difficult decisions. "That's a serious accusation. I know what I saw. When I touch objects, I see the emotions and memories attached to them. The chalice showed me everything. Beatrice with the witch, your father's death, all of it. You're asking me to believe that my betrothed is a murderer based on visions." His hands fell away from her shoulders. "Do you understand what this means? If you're wrong, if this is some mistake..." "I'm not wrong." Tears burned her eyes. "Please, Alderaan. I wouldn't lie about this." He turned away, running both hands through his hair. The mate bond between them pulsed with his turmoil. Belief warring with political necessity, fury battling with fear. "I believe you, Sarah, but belief isn't enough. The council won't accept visions alone. We need proof they can't ignore." The dismissal stung, even though she knew he was right. "Then what do we do?" "I investigate." Quietly. He faced her again, jaw set with determination. "If Thornberry truly killed my father, I will have justice. But we must be careful. He controls half the kingdom's resources. One wrong move, and we risk civil war." Over the next 2 days, Alderaan worked in secret. He questioned servants using alpha compulsion, dug through archived military records, followed trails Sarah's vision had revealed. Margot was moved to protected chambers with armed guards, not as punishment, but as insurance against Beatrice's retaliation. Meanwhile, Sarah's strange episodes increased. In moments of stress, something inside her pushed against invisible walls, trying to break free. Her senses sharpened unnaturally. Once, she heard a conversation 3 corridors away. Another time, she moved fast enough to catch a falling candelabra before it crashed. Speed she shouldn't possess. And the dreams. Every night the silver wolf ran through moonlit forests, and every night, Sarah felt closer to understanding what it meant. On the 3rd day, Alderon found her in the library. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, but triumph gleamed there too. I found proof. Witnesses who saw Thornberry with suspicious supplies before my father's death. Records of payments to a known poisoner. It's enough to call for investigation. He pulled her close, and the mate bond sang with relief at the contact. You were right, Seraphine. About all of it. What happens now? Now I take this to the Council of Alphas. They'll demand trial by testimony, and that's where you come in. Sarah's blood went cold. Me? There's an ancient ritual. Testimonio de Lua. Testimony of the moon. A suspected person touches an object connected to their alleged crime under the full moon. If they're truly moonborn, the goddess reveals the truth to all witnesses. His hands tightened on her arms. But if they're lying, if they're not what they claim, the moon's fire consumes them. I could die. Yes, no lies, no false comfort. But it's the only way to prove your gift is real, to make the council believe what you saw. Without it, Thornberry will claim you're lying to sabotage the engagement. Sarah thought about the years of dismissal, of being treated as less than nothing. She thought about Alderon's father, murdered by people he'd trusted, about the mate bond that would be severed if Beatrice succeeded. And she thought about the silver wolf in her dreams, waiting to be born. When is the full moon? Tomorrow night. Then we do it. She met his golden eyes steadily. I'm not afraid. I am. He pressed his forehead against hers, the gesture achingly intimate. If I lose you, if this goes wrong, it won't. I can feel it, Alderon. Something inside me is waking up. Something that's been sleeping my whole life. She pulled back enough to see his face. I was never broken. I was just waiting. He kissed her then, desperate and claiming, and the mate bond flared so bright she gasped. This wasn't the gentle recognition from before. This was possession, promise, and plea all wrapped together. When they parted, both breathing hard, Sarah knew nothing would ever be the same. Tomorrow she would face the moon's judgment. Tomorrow she would prove to everyone, including herself, what she truly was. But tonight, she stood in the arms of her mate and felt, for the first time, whole. Somewhere in the castle, Beatrice discovered that her carefully laid plans had been exposed. And in the dark, she began planning something far more dangerous than poison. Chapter 5. The Price of Truth. The vault beneath Ironhold Castle smelled of old stone and older secrets. Sarah followed Alderon down the spiral stairs, her heart hammering with each step. He'd woken her before dawn, his face grim with purpose. There are records here my father kept hidden, he explained, unlocking an iron door with a key that hung from a chain around his neck. Documents about Thornberry's dealings, correspondence, payment ledgers. If there's proof of what you saw, it will be here. The chamber beyond was smaller than Sarah expected, lined with shelves holding leather-bound volumes and sealed scrolls. Alderon moved with focused determination, pulling down books and spreading them across a central table. Help me search. Anything mentioning Thornberry or purchases made 8 years ago. They worked in silence, broken only by turning pages, and Alderon's occasional frustrated curse. The mate bond hummed between them, stronger now that they were alone. Sarah found herself acutely aware of every movement he made, every breath he took. Here, her fingers had found a merchant's ledger, its pages yellowed with age. Look at this entry. 3 vials of nightshade extract, purchased by a lady bee from a trader in the southern provinces. The date matches your father's campaign. Alderon leaned over her shoulder to read, his proximity making her skin prickle with heat. Nightshade. That's what the healers suspected, though they could never prove it. His jaw clenched. What else? Over the next hours, they pieced together a damning pattern. Payments to known criminals. Letters carefully worded to avoid direct admission, but clear in their intent. Witness statements from soldiers who'd noticed strange figures near the king's tent the night he fell ill. Statements that had been buried and forgotten. It's not enough, Alderaan said finally, exhaustion roughening his voice. These are circumstantial. No court would convict on this alone, especially not against a family as powerful as Thornberry's. Then we get more proof. Sarah's voice was steadier than she felt. There must be someone who saw something. Someone who can testify. Who would risk Thornberry's wrath? He controls half the trade in this kingdom. Anyone who speaks against him loses their livelihood at best, their life at worst. What about your advisors? Surely some of them suspected. My advisors. Alderaan's laugh was bitter. Let me show you something about my advisors. He led her back up the stairs and through the castle's pre-dawn silence to the council chamber. 5 men waited there, roused from sleep by royal summons. Their expressions ranged from confused to wary. Your Majesty, Lord Pemberton began, the eldest of the group. What urgent matter requires— Sit. The alpha command in Alderaan's voice made them all drop into chairs immediately. You're going to answer some questions, and you're going to tell me the truth. Do you understand? Sarah watched from the doorway as Alderaan interrogated them one by one, his power pressing down until sweat beaded on their foreheads. The truth came reluctantly, shamefully. 3 of the 5 had accepted bribes from Thornberry over the years. 2 had suspected the late king's death wasn't natural, but feared speaking up. 1 had actually witnessed Beatrice meeting with suspicious figures, but convinced himself it was innocent. You knew. Alderaan's voice was deadly quiet. Some of you suspected my father was murdered, and you said nothing. Your Majesty, we had no proof. Pemberton started. You had enough to investigate, enough to warn me. The windows rattled with the force of his fury. You are all dismissed from your positions. Effective immediately. Get out of my sight before I forget mercy. They fled. Alderaan stood rigid in the empty chamber, hands braced on the table, breathing hard. Sarah approached cautiously and placed her hand on his back. The touch seemed to ground him. They were afraid, she said softly. That doesn't excuse it, but I understand fear. It makes cowards of us all. You're not a coward. He turned to face her, one hand coming up to cup her cheek. You're the bravest person I know. The moment broke when urgent footsteps echoed in the corridor. A messenger burst in, out of breath. Your Majesty, Lord Thornberry requests immediate audience. He says it's about the wedding. Sarah felt Alderaan tense. Send him in. Thornberry entered with the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. He was older than Sarah remembered from glimpses in court. Silver streaking his dark hair, lines carving deep around his mouth. But his eyes were sharp, calculating, missing nothing. Your Majesty, I've heard disturbing rumors about delays to the wedding ceremony. His gaze flickered to Sarah, dismissive. I wanted to assure you that such delays are unnecessary. In fact, I propose we move the ceremony forward. 3 days from now instead of 3 weeks. That's quite sudden, Alderaan said, his voice carefully neutral. The alliance is too important to risk, and frankly, I've noticed certain distractions that might benefit from swift resolution. Again, that pointed look at Sarah. I've also been reviewing our military arrangements. The northern border defenses rely heavily on my family's troops. It would be unfortunate if any misunderstandings led to those troops being recalled during this critical time. The threat was clear. Marry Beatrice quickly and without questions, or face the consequences. I'll consider your proposal, Alderaan said. I hope you'll consider it favorably. My daughter is quite eager to become your queen. Thornberry's smile didn't reach his eyes. Good day, Your Majesty. After he left, Sarah found her hands shaking. He knows you're investigating. Then we move faster. Alderaan's jaw was set with determination. Come with me. He led her to his father's memorial chamber, where the late king's crown sat on a velvet cushion beneath a portrait. The crown was ancient gold, worked with silver wolves and set with moonstones that caught the light. Touch it, Alderaan said. See if it shows you anything more." Sarah approached cautiously. The moment her fingers brushed the metal, the vision slammed into her. She saw the military camp in vivid detail now. The late king, Alderon's father, she could see the resemblance, drinking from the poisoned flask. But this time she saw more. Saw him clutch his chest, saw the healer who examined him shake his head gravely. Saw young Alderon, barely 24, being told his father was dead. Saw Lord Thornbury comforting the grieving son while his daughter Beatrice watched with cold satisfaction. But there was something else. A conversation between Thornbury and a hooded figure after the king's death, discussing how the poison had worked perfectly, how no one would ever trace it back to them. When Sarah pulled away, tears streaming down her face, she found Alderon watching her with desperate hope. "I saw everything, the whole conspiracy. But Alderon, there's no way to prove it. The witnesses are dead or bought off. The evidence is circumstantial. Without testimony from someone who was there, then we create testimony that cannot be denied." He took her hands in his. "I'm calling a council of alphas. Every pack leader in Valemont will gather to hear the charges, and I'm proposing a testimonio da lua." Sarah's blood ran cold. "The moon's testimony. It's the only way. You'll touch my father's crown under the full moon, in the presence of all the alphas. If you're truly moonborn, if your visions are real, the goddess will show everyone what happened. The truth will be undeniable. And if I'm not, if I'm just a broken, wolfless girl seeing things," his hands tightened on hers, "then the moon's fire will consume you, and I'll have sent my mate to her death for revenge." The next day was spent in tense preparation. Messengers rode out to every corner of Valemont, summoning the alphas to gather. Sarah was moved to chambers adjacent to Alderon's under heavy guard. Not to imprison her, he explained, but to protect her. Thornbury would not take kindly to their plan. That night, unable to sleep, Sarah found herself drawn to the window. The moon hung heavy in the sky. 2 days from full. In 2 days, she would face her test. A knock at the connecting door between their chambers made her turn. Alderon entered, also clearly unable to rest. "I keep thinking about my grandfather," he said, moving to stand beside her. "How losing his mate nearly destroyed him. The mate bond is supposed to be this beautiful thing, but it's also a weapon, a vulnerability. Are you sorry?" Sarah's voice came out small. "That the bond chose me? No." He turned to face her fully. "Never. But I'm terrified of losing you. If something goes wrong tomorrow, it won't. You can't know that. I can." She took his hand, placing it over her heart. "Something's been changing in me. I can feel it, especially at night. Like something inside is waiting to wake up. The silver wolf from my dreams feels closer now. More real. The moonborn transformation." Alderon murmured. "It said they don't shift like normal wolves. Their power manifests differently in response to great need or danger. Then let's hope tomorrow counts." She managed to smile. "Either way, we'll know the truth." He pulled her close, and she went willingly into his arms. They stood like that for a long time, drawing comfort from each other's presence, the mate bond wrapping around them both like a protective cocoon. "Whatever happens," Alderon whispered against her hair, "know that you are the bravest, most extraordinary person I've ever known. And I am honored that the goddess chose you for me." Sarah's throat tightened with emotion. "I love you." The words had been building in her for weeks, but saying them aloud felt like stepping off a cliff. Alderon went very still, then pulled back to look at her with eyes that blazed gold. "Say it again. I love you. I don't know when it started. Maybe that first night in the banquet hall. Maybe the first time you spoke to me like I mattered, but I know it's true." He kissed her with a desperation that spoke of fear and need and love so overwhelming it stole her breath. When they finally parted, both shaking, the mate bond between them pulsed so bright, Sarah swore she could see it. "I love you," Alderon said, his voice rough with emotion. "My mate, my moonborn, my everything." They held each other through the rest of the night, neither sleeping, both dreading and hoping for dawn. Tomorrow would bring answers. Tomorrow would either prove Sarah's gift or condemn her to death. But tonight, They had each other. And for now, that was enough. Chapter 6. Moonfire. The sacred clearing lay 3 miles beyond Ironhold's walls, hidden within ancient forest where moonlight fell unobstructed. Sarah stood at its center, barefoot in a simple white shift, feeling exposed under the eyes of 50 alpha wolves who ringed the space in judgment. The full moon hung heavy overhead, so bright it cast shadows sharp as blades. Power thrummed in the air, making her skin prickle with awareness. This was a place where the veil between mortal and divine grew thin. Alderaan stood at the clearing's edge, flanked by royal guards. His face was a mask of controlled tension, but through the mate bond, Sarah felt his terror. If this went wrong, she would die in agony, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Let the accused step forward. The elder Alpha's voice carried weight of centuries. He was ancient, gray-bearded, eyes milky with age but still sharp with authority. Lord Thornberry moved to stand opposite Sarah, his expression carefully neutral. Beside him, Beatrice watched with cold calculation. They both believed Sarah would fail, that the moon would expose her as a fraud and burn her to ash. The charges, the elder Alpha continued, are grave. Murder of a king, conspiracy against the crown, treason of the highest order. The accused maintains her innocence and claims proof through moonborn gift. We gather under the goddess's eye to witness truth. He placed the late king's crown on a stone altar between them, ancient gold worked with silver, moonstones gleaming in the light. Sarah's hands trembled as she approached. The rules are simple, the elder said. Touch the crown. If you possess true sight, the goddess will reveal what you have seen to all present. If you lie, if you seek to deceive through trickery or manipulation, the moon's fire will consume you. His milky eyes fixed on her. There is no mercy in this test. No second chances. Do you accept these terms? Sarah's throat was dry, but her voice came steady. I accept. Then begin. She reached for the crown with shaking hands. The moment her fingers brushed gold, the world exploded into light. Pain seared through her, white-hot and all-consuming. She gasped, falling to her knees, but couldn't pull away. The crown had become molten in her grip, burning without heat, binding her to the vision. And then everyone saw. The images projected into the air above them, visible and undeniable. The military camp materialized in ghostly silver light. The late king accepting a flask from a servant whose face was hidden, but whose hands bore a distinctive ring that matched the one currently on Beatrice's finger. The Alphas watched in shocked silence as the king drank, as he clutched his chest in agony, as he died while Lord Thornberry stood nearby, ensuring no true healer got close enough to save him. The vision shifted, Beatrice meeting with the Blood Witch in shadowed rooms, gold coins changing hands, vials of poison being mixed, conversations about controlling the young king once his father was gone. Lies! Thornberry's voice shattered the silence. This is manipulation. Sorcery designed to silence. The elder Alpha's command cut through his protests. The goddess shows only truth. We all see the same vision. You condemn yourself by denying what is plain. But the ritual wasn't finished. The moon's light intensified, focusing entirely on Sarah now. The pain increased tenfold, and she screamed. This was the final test, the elder had warned. Visions alone weren't enough. To prove she was truly moonborn, she had to manifest her wolf. The impossibility of it tore at her. She had no wolf, had never had one. 23 years of being broken, incomplete, less than, I can't, she gasped, tears streaming down her face. There's nothing inside me to manifest. The fire intensified. Her skin began to glow with inner heat, burning from the inside out. Through the agony, she heard Alderaan roar her name, felt him throw himself against the invisible barrier that kept him from the circle. The mate bond between them stretched taut, screaming with his desperation. Seraphine! His voice broke on her name. Fight it! Don't give up! But there was nothing to fight with. No wolf to call upon. No transformation waiting. Just a wolfless girl dying in front of everyone who'd ever dismissed her. The mate bond pulsed. And in that pulse, Sarah felt Alderon's absolute certainty, his unshakable belief that she was more than broken, more than failed, that the power inside her was real, just sleeping, waiting for the right moment to wake. Manifest! Alderon's alpha command crashed through the clearing with the force of a physical blow. Not commanding her to obey, commanding the wolf inside her to answer. I command you to wake, to protect your mate, to live. Something deep in Sarah's chest shattered. Pain exploded outward, but different now. Not burning her away, but remaking her. She felt bones that had never existed begin to form. Felt power that had slept for 23 years finally wake. The silver wolf from her dreams opened its eyes. The transformation was nothing like normal shifting. No painful cracking of bones. No tearing of flesh. Instead, light poured from Sarah's skin. Brilliant and blinding. When it faded, where a small human woman had knelt now stood a massive wolf. But not an ordinary wolf. Her fur was pure silver that caught moonlight and seemed to glow from within. Markings traced her body, ancient symbols that pulsed with lunar power. The language of the moon goddess herself, written in living light. Her eyes burned green as summer leaves, bright with intelligence and ancient knowing. She was twice the size of even the largest alpha wolf. Power radiated from her in waves that made every shifter present drop instinctively to their knees. Even Lord Thornberry fell, his face gone pale with shock and fear. The spirit wolf, the blessed form of the moonborn. Proof undeniable that Sarah was exactly what she claimed. The elder alpha was the first to speak, his voice filled with reverent awe. The goddess has spoken. The accused is proven true. The charges against Lord Thornberry and Lady Beatrice Thornberry stand confirmed by divine testimony. Beatrice moved then, turning to flee into the forest. But Sarah was faster. She leaped with impossible speed, landing in front of the noblewoman and cutting off her escape. Up close, in this form, Sarah could see the terror in Beatrice's ice-blue eyes. "Guards!" Alderon's voice rang out. "Take them both into custody. They will stand trial for regicide and treason." As guards moved forward to secure the prisoners, the barrier around the ritual circle dissolved. Alderon ran to Sarah, falling to his knees before her massive wolf form. His hands shook as they touched her silver fur. "You're alive," he breathed. "Thank the goddess, you're alive." Sarah felt the transformation begin to reverse. The wolf form was too powerful to maintain long, her body not yet accustomed to holding so much divine power. She shifted back to human, collapsing into Alderon's arms as weakness swept through her. He caught her, wrapping her in his cloak to preserve her modesty. "I've got you," he murmured against her hair. "You're safe now. You did it." Through exhausted haze, Sarah watched as Thornberry and Beatrice were led away in chains. The alphas who had witnessed the ritual stood in stunned silence, many still processing what they'd seen. "The spirit wolf," one of them whispered. "I never thought I'd witness such a thing in my lifetime." "The Alpha King's mate is blessed by the goddess herself," another added. "This changes everything." The elder Alpha approached, his expression grave but respectful. "Lady Seraphine, the council acknowledges your gift and your courage. The charges are proven beyond doubt. Lord Thornberry and his daughter will face judgment for their crimes." Sarah could barely keep her eyes open, but she managed to nod. "Thank you, Elder. Rest now, child. You have earned it." Alderon carried her back to the castle as dawn began to break. She drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. The mate bond wrapped around them both like protective armor. "I was so afraid," he admitted quietly as they neared Ironhold. "When I saw you burning, felt your pain through the bond, I thought I'd lose you before we'd even had a chance to truly begin. I'm here." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm not going anywhere." "Good, because I need you, Seraphine. Not just as my mate, but as my equal, as the queen this kingdom needs." Queen. The word should have terrified her. Instead, wrapped in his arms with divine power still humming faintly in her veins, it felt right, like finally stepping into a role she'd been born for, but never knew existed. They had won this battle, proven the truth, exposed the conspiracy. But as Sarah drifted toward sleep, she knew their story was far from over. The real work, rebuilding, reforming, creating a better kingdom, was just beginning. But for now, she was content to rest in the arms of her mate, the Alpha King who had believed in her when no one else would. Together, they would face whatever came next. Chapter 7. Blood and Silver. Lord Thornberry stood in chains before the Council of Alphas 3 days after the ritual, his daughter beside him, no longer adorned in silk and jewels, but dressed in prisoner's gray. The evidence was overwhelming, the visions undeniable. 50 witnesses had seen the truth revealed under the moon's light. The charges of regicide and high treason are proven beyond doubt, the Elder Alpha pronounced. You murdered King Alderon's father through poison and conspiracy. You plotted to control the crown through manipulation and deceit. The sentence is exile, permanent banishment from Valemont, stripped of all titles, lands, and holdings. Thornberry's face remained cold, calculating even in defeat. You're making a mistake. My family controls nothing. Alderon's voice cut through the hall. Your packlands are forfeit to the crown. Your resources will be redistributed among loyal Alphas. Your name will be stricken from our histories. He stood from his throne, golden eyes blazing. And if you ever set foot in Valemont again, I will kill you myself. As guards led them away, Beatrice turned one last time, her ice-blue eyes finding Sarah in the crowd. The hatred there was pure and absolute, a promise of vengeance that made Sarah's wolf stir uneasily. But they were leaving. The threat was over. Margot was called forward next, her weathered face uncertain as she approached the throne. Alderon smiled, a rare, genuine expression that transformed his stern features. Margot, you served my father faithfully, and you protected Seraphine when no one else would. For your loyalty and courage, I grant you the title of Dame, along with lands in the Western Valley and a seat on my council. The older woman's eyes filled with tears. Your Majesty, I'm just a cook. You're the bravest woman I know, Sarah said, stepping forward to embrace her. You deserve this. That night, after the ceremonies concluded, Alderon found Sarah in the royal chambers. She stood by the window, still wearing the formal gown from court, watching moonlight paint silver across the castle grounds. It's done, he said quietly, coming to stand behind her. They're gone. I know, but something still felt wrong. The mate bond thrummed with unease she couldn't explain. Seraphine, look at me. She turned, and the intensity in his golden eyes stole her breath. He moved closer, one hand coming up to cup her face with devastating gentleness. The bond between us is recognized by the council. Beatrice is gone. Nothing stands between us now. His thumb traced her cheekbone. I want to complete the mating, properly, permanently. Her heart hammered. What does that mean? It means I claim you before the goddess and my pack. It means the bond becomes unbreakable, sealed for life. His voice dropped lower. It means I mark you as mine, and you mark me as yours. The air between them felt charged, electric. Sarah had spent weeks learning to control her new spirit wolf form, training with Alderon in private sessions that left them both breathless and wanting. The tension had been building, the mate bond pulling tighter with each passing day. I want that, she whispered. I want you. He kissed her then, deep and claiming, and the world narrowed to just them. His hands found the laces of her gown, loosening them with careful reverence. She helped him remove his formal attire, fingers trembling with anticipation. When they came together, it was with the desperate intensity of two people who had waited too long, fought too hard to reach this moment. The mate bond blazed between them, golden and silver light intertwining as their bodies moved in perfect synchronization. At the peak, Alderon's teeth found her neck, marking her with the mating bite that would brand her as his forever. The pain was brief. Overwhelmed by pleasure so intense, Sarah cried out. Then she bit him in return, sealing the bond from both sides. The sensation was indescribable. She felt Alderon's soul merge with hers, felt their wolves recognize each other completely. The mate bond that had been forming over weeks solidified into something unbreakable, permanent as stone. When they finally lay tangled together, both breathing hard, Sarah touched the mark on her neck. It tingled with residual power. "It's done," Alderaan murmured against her hair. "You're mine. I'm yours. Nothing can change that now." She fell asleep in his arms, more complete than she'd ever felt. The broken, wolfless girl was gone. In her place was a moonborn, a mate, someone who finally belonged. But 3 weeks later, as preparations for their formal union ceremony began, the threats Sarah had sensed became real. She was reviewing seating arrangements in the council chamber when her psychometry ability flared. A scroll she touched carried rage and conspiracy. She saw faces she didn't recognize, alphas who hadn't attended the moon ritual, who viewed her ascension as an affront to tradition. They were planning something violent. Sarah spent the next day using her gift, touching objects throughout the castle, following the trail of conspiracy. The would-be assassins had been careful, but not careful enough to hide from Moonborn's sight. She found them in the eastern tower, 3 alphas meeting in secret. Through the door, she heard their plans. "The ceremony is in 2 days. We strike then during the vows. Kill the Moonborn before she can transform. What about the Alpha King? If he dies defending her, so be it. Better than letting a wolfless servant wear our crown." Rage flooded Sarah, hot and righteous. Her wolf surged to the surface, demanding she act. She should have waited for Alderaan, should have brought guards. But the thought of these men harming her mate overrode caution. She kicked open the door. The 3 alphas spun, shock crossing their faces. Then calculation. 3 against 1, and they didn't know what she was capable of. "The Moonborn," one sneered. "Come to beg for her life?" No. Sarah felt the transformation begin, silver light bleeding through her skin. "I've come to end this." The spirit wolf manifested in a burst of lunar power. She was faster than normal wolves, stronger, blessed by the goddess herself. The first alpha shifted to meet her, but she was already moving. Her jaws closed on his shoulder, throwing him against the wall with enough force to knock him unconscious. The second attacked from behind. She spun, claws raking across his muzzle. The third hesitated, fear finally overcoming arrogance. "You wanted to kill a wolfless servant?" Sarah's voice came out wrong in wolf form, layered with power. "Then face a Moonborn instead." The fight was brutal, but brief. These were strong alphas, experienced warriors, but they'd never faced divine power before. Sarah fought with precision born of weeks of training with Alderaan, combined with instincts that came from her spirit wolf. When it ended, all 3 lay defeated. 1 unconscious, 2 too injured to move. Sarah stood over them, breathing hard, bleeding from a gash across her ribs where one had gotten lucky. "Seraphine!" Alderaan burst through the door, guards behind him. Someone must have heard the fight. His eyes went wild seeing her injured, the mate bond screaming with his fury. "I'm fine," she said quickly, shifting back to human form. One of the guards hastily offered his cloak to preserve her modesty. "They were planning to attack during the ceremony. I handled it. You should have come to me." His hands were gentle despite the anger in his voice as he examined her wound. "You could have been killed, but I wasn't." She met his gaze steadily. "I'm not a damsel who needs constant protection, Alderaan. I'm a Moonborn. You're equal." Something shifted in his expression. The fear faded, replaced by fierce pride. "You are. I'm sorry. You're right. He pulled her close, careful of her injury. "I can't lose you." "You won't." She pressed her forehead against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. "We're bonded. Where you go, I go, always." The 3 conspirators were taken to the dungeons. Their lands would be stripped, their names disgraced. But more importantly, their plot had failed. The message was clear. Threatening the Alpha King's mate meant facing the wrath of a spirit wolf. That night, as a healer tended Sarah's wound, Margot brought news. "Word has spread of what you did, child. The other alphas are talking. They're saying you fought 3 warriors alone and won." Pride shone in her weathered features. "They're starting to understand what it means to have a Moonborn as queen." Sarah looked at her reflection in the mirror. The mating mark stood out clearly on her neck, proof of her bond with Alderaan. Her green eyes held power they'd never had before. She was no longer the invisible servant scrubbing floors. She was Queen Seraphine, blessed by the moon goddess herself. Chapter 8. Crown of Moonlight. The week before the coronation passed in a blur of decisions that would reshape Valamont forever. Sarah sat beside Alderaan in the council chamber, no longer a silent observer, but an active voice in governance. The law as written states that Omegas without wolves cannot own property. Alderaan read from an ancient legal text, his jaw clenched with barely contained fury at how his kingdom had treated its most vulnerable. I propose we strike it entirely. More than that, Sarah added, her voice steady despite the weight of dozens of eyes on her. We should establish protections. Any Omega, wolfless or not, who is abused or mistreated can appeal directly to the Crown for justice. Lord Pemberton, one of the few advisors Alderaan had allowed to remain after proving his loyalty, nodded thoughtfully. It's unprecedented, Your Majesty. But then again, so is having a moonborn as queen. Exactly. Alderaan's hand found Sarah's beneath the table, their fingers intertwining. The old ways failed us. My father died because we were too blind to see corruption. Seraphine suffered because we valued shifting ability over character. Those days are over. They worked late into each night, rewriting laws that had stood for centuries. Wolfless individuals gained the right to own land, to testify in court, to hold positions beyond servitude. The rigid hierarchy that had defined pack society for generations was carefully dismantled, replaced with merit-based advancement. You're making enemies, Margot warned one evening, bringing them food in the library where they'd been working for hours. The old noble families don't like change. They don't have to like it, Sarah replied, marking another document with the royal seal. They just have to obey it. Margot's weathered face creased with a smile. Look at you. A month ago you were scrubbing floors. Now you're rewriting the kingdom's laws. Speaking of which, Alderaan set down his quill and fixed the older woman with a serious gaze. Margot, I'm creating a new position. Counselor to the Crown, with particular focus on representing those without traditional power, servants, farmers, the wolfless. I want you to fill it. Margot's eyes widened. Your Majesty, I'm just a cook. You're the woman who protected my mate when no one else would, Alderaan interrupted. You're the woman who taught her kindness in a cruel world. You're exactly who I need. He smiled. Besides, you've been managing the castle's logistics for 30 years. You know more about governance than half my nobles. Tears filled Margot's eyes as she accepted the position, becoming the first common-born woman to sit on the royal council in Valamont's history. The morning of the coronation dawned clear and bright, as if even the weather recognized the significance of the day. Sarah stood in the royal chambers while attendants dressed her in a gown that seemed woven from moonlight itself, silver silk that caught the light and shimmered with every movement, embroidered with wolves rendered in thread of silver. Her long brown hair had been arranged in an intricate style that left her neck bare, prominently displaying Alderaan's mating mark. She wore no other jewelry save for a single pendant, a silver wolf that had belonged to Alderaan's mother. You're beautiful. Alderaan appeared in the doorway, resplendent in black and burgundy, his crown already in place, but his golden eyes held only her. Are you ready? Terrified, she admitted. A month ago I was invisible. Now I'm about to be crowned before the entire kingdom. He crossed to her, taking both her hands in his. You were never invisible to me. From the moment I saw you in that hall, covered in wine while they mocked you, I saw you, and I've been unable to look away since. The cathedral was ancient stone and stained glass, capable of holding 1,000 souls. Today it held representatives from every pack in Valamont, nobles and commoners alike. Sarah walked down the aisle on Alderaan's arm, feeling the weight of their stares. Some looked at her with awe, others with suspicion. All of them watched with intensity that made her skin prickle. The elder Alpha waited at the altar, his milky eyes somehow seeing more than most. Beside him sat 2 crowns on velvet cushions, one the traditional Luna crown, delicate silver worked with moonstones. The other was different, unique, larger, more ornate, marked with the same lunar symbols that had appeared on her spirit wolf form. "We gather to witness history," the elder Alpha's voice carried through the vast space, "to crown not just a Luna, but a moon queen, the first in 300 years. Blessed by the goddess herself, proven by trial, claimed by our Alpha King." The ceremony proceeded with ancient words and sacred oils. When the moment came, Alderaan himself lifted the crown and placed it on Sarah's head. Not the Luna crown, but the Moon Queen's crown, acknowledgement that she was more than a mate, more than a consort. She was power in her own right. "I crown you, Seraphine, Moon Queen of Valamont. May your reign be just, your wisdom deep, and your power used in service of all our people." Alderaan's voice rang clear as he made his vow before the entire court. "I pledge my life, my throne, and my kingdom to you. You are my mate, my equal, my partner in all things." Then Sarah spoke, her voice stronger than she'd expected. "I pledge to serve this kingdom and its people, to protect the vulnerable, to challenge injustice, and to prove that worth isn't measured by the wolf you carry, but by the strength of your heart." When their lips met in the ceremonial kiss, the cathedral erupted in cheers. Not universal. She saw some faces remain cold, unmoved, but enough. Enough voices raised in celebration to drown out the dissenters. The celebration that followed filled the great hall where, months ago, Beatrice had humiliated her. Now Sarah stood at the high table wearing a crown, Alderaan's hand warm in hers, watching nobles bow who once wouldn't have acknowledged her existence. She was greeting a delegation of Eastern Alphas when she noticed the commotion. A young girl, perhaps 16, stumbled through the crowd. Her dress was servant's brown, and her face bore the hunted look Sarah knew too well. Behind her, two nobles laughed, one holding a half-empty goblet of wine. "Clumsy, wolfless wretch," one sneered. "Can't even walk properly." The room's attention shifted. This was a test, Sarah realized. Everyone watching to see if the new Moon Queen's pretty words about protecting the vulnerable were genuine, or just performance. Sarah moved before Alderaan could stop her, crossing the hall with purpose. She reached the girl, and placed herself between the frightened Omega and the nobles. "Your names," she said quietly, but her voice carried. The nobles' smirks faltered. "Your Majesty, we were just—" "Your names," not a request this time. They gave them reluctantly. Sarah committed both to memory. Under the new laws signed this very morning, abuse of wolfless Omegas is punishable by loss of title and lands. She let that sink in. "You have one chance." Apologize to her. Sincerely. Pride warred with fear on their faces. Finally, self-preservation won. They mumbled apologies, though neither met the girl's eyes. "Now leave my sight." When they hesitated, silver light flickered in Sarah's eyes, a hint of the spirit wolf beneath. They fled. Sarah turned to the girl, who stared at her with shock and something like worship. "What's your name?" Lily, Your Majesty." "Lily." Sarah took her hands gently. "You are wolfless, yes?" The girl nodded miserably. "So was I. For 23 years, I believed I was broken, useless, less than nothing." She squeezed Lily's hands. "But I was wrong. And so is anyone who tells you that. Starting tomorrow, you and every other wolfless Omega in this kingdom will be tested for moonborn gifts. If you have them, you'll be trained. If you don't, you'll still be treated with the dignity every person deserves." Tears streamed down Lily's face. "Thank you, Your Majesty. Thank you." As Sarah returned to the high table, the hall was utterly silent. Then, slowly, applause began. Not from the nobles, from the servants standing along the walls, from the guards at the doors, from common folk who'd been allowed to witness the coronation. Their queen had just proven she meant what she said. Alderaan pulled her close when she sat, pressing a kiss to her temple. That was either brilliant or insane. "Both," she admitted, heart still racing. "But necessary. I know. That's why I love you." That night, alone in their chambers with celebration still echoing through the castle, Sarah stood on the private balcony overlooking Ironhold. The city spread below, thousands of lights twinkling in the darkness. Beyond lay the kingdom, vast, complicated. full of people who needed change. Alderon's arms wrapped around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. What are you thinking? That it's overwhelming. All of it. A month ago I was nobody, and now... She gestured at the crown sitting on the table inside. Now I'm responsible for thousands of lives. We are responsible, he corrected. Together. Always together. She leaned back against his solid warmth, drawing strength from the mate bond that pulsed steadily between them. There will be more attempts. More nobles who hate what we represent, what we're changing. Probably. His arms tightened. But we'll face them. You're not alone anymore, Seraphine. You never will be again. She turned in his embrace, looking up at the man who'd seen her when she was invisible, who'd defended her when she had nothing, who'd believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. I love you, she whispered. My mate, my king, my everything. And I love you. My moon queen, my miracle, my heart. As they stood together on the balcony, two souls bound by fate and choice, Sarah thought about how far she'd come, from servant to queen, from broken to blessed, from invisible to impossible to ignore. The journey had been painful, terrifying, overwhelming. But standing here in Alderon's arms, wearing a crown that proved her worth, knowing she had the power to change lives for the better, it had all been worth it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Enemies who resisted change. Prejudices that wouldn't die overnight. The difficult work of rebuilding a society from its foundations. But tonight, Sarah was simply grateful for the mate bond that thrummed between them, for the kingdom spread below that she would protect with everything she had, for the chance to prove that Wolfless didn't mean worthless, that Omega didn't mean weak. She had been rejected, dismissed, humiliated, but she had survived, more than survived. She had transformed, and her reign was only beginning.